In this lesson, we'll learn about Cisco router booting process. We'll learn about the following topics in this lesson. First of all, we'll go through Cisco router booting process. After that, we will work with the configuration files. Then we'll sum up our lesson with the keynotes. To have a better understanding about the booting process, let's talk about the types of memory on a Cisco router. As you can see, this is a Cisco router and it has four main types of memory. The first one is RAM or random access memory. It is the fastest type of memory, but it is the only type of memory that does not keep anything stored on it when power off. The next type of memory is NVRAM or non-volatile RAM. It is the second fastest type of memory and it keeps anything stored on it when power off. Flash is like a hard drive on your computer. It has biggest capacity, but it is the slowest type of memory. ROM is read-only memory. It is the only type of memory that you cannot make change to it. It stores programs installed by Cisco. Now that we know all four main types of memory on a Cisco router, let's get right into the booting process. Here we are with the Cisco router in the power off state. At this state, ROM store bootstrap program, Flash store Cisco IOS, and VRAM store startup configuration file. RAM does not have anything. The moment we press the power button, CPU started executing bootstrap program in ROM. The bootstrap program instructed the CPU to perform power on cell test to make sure all hardware components are in good state. It then instructed the CPU to load Cisco IOS from flash into RAM. As soon as the Cisco IOS is loaded into RAM, it takes over the bootstrap program. The iOS then instructed the CPU to locate and load the startup config into RAM, then makes it running config. We would then be presented in CLI interface. From now on, all the configuration changes via Cisco CLI will be updated immediately into the running config file. Also, the running config can be updated into the startup config file. Let's find out more detail in the next slides. Let's assume we have just made some configuration changes via CLI and everything works as expected. We know that the changes are immediately updated to the running config file in memory, and all the change will be lost after the router reboots. To save the change, we need to copy the content of the running config file to the startup config file. To do that, at the privilege mode of the router, we need to issue the command copy run start, then hit enter. It will ask if the destination file name is startup config. We just hit enter and it saved the running config to the startup config. There's another way to achieve this goal, is to issue the command write mem also at the privilege mode of the router and hit enter, and it saved the running config to the startup config right away without asking any question. Now, in case our configuration change is not working as expected, To quickly restore the working configuration from the startup config file at the privilege mode of the router, we need to issue the command copy start run and hit enter. It will ask if the destination file is running config. We just hit enter and it shows us how big is the startup config file, and that's it. We got everything restored from the startup config file. In the lab environment, you usually want to remove startup config to wipe out the entire router's configuration to build a new one. In order to do that, at the privilege mode, you issue the command write erase and hit enter. It will ask you to confirm. If you are certain, just hit enter. Once the startup config file is erased, you can reload or power off, then power on the router. It will boot with a now empty startup configuration. You can also remove startup config with the commands erase startup config or erase NVRAM. However, after you erase the startup config but you haven't reloaded the router, to quickly recover the startup config using the running config, you can set the running config back to the startup config using the command that we learned in the previous line. Let's read the keynotes to finish the lesson.